What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and joining me today is my special guest, Michele Letendre. So Michele started actually her academic career with an undergrad from Concordia, and since then has pretty much dedicated her life to getting fitter and also getting other people fitter and healthier. You probably know her most from 6 times at the CrossFit Games. She competed there, finished with a 4th place finish in 2014, which was her best place finish. And then basically transitioned into coaching, and she's coached some beasts that you'd probably recognize if you followed the sport: Patrick Vellner, Laura Horvath, and James Newbury, and a bunch of others. So we're going to talk all things about her journey and how she helps her athletes get fitter and healthier and live a better life. Michele, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So let's start with how this all began. Let's start with, I know you have a swimming background, water polo. Was that sort of how the transition happened into CrossFit, or how did that all unfold?
Actually, I started swimming when I was really young. So we lived in front of a pool. Anyone who lives in Montreal knows that in the West Island, there's a bunch of community pools, and it's like part of the life there when you grow up. So I started swimming when I was super, super young, and I started competitive swimming at 7. And then I did 3 years of that, but then I moved to water polo for 5 years, took a year off, and then kind of missed training, and then went back. But water polo was like my main sport from all throughout high school. And in Quebec, we have Cégep. So when I got to Cégep is pretty much when I figured it would be time to stop. I was trying to get on to some junior national teams and some different higher level teams, and I was just not making the cut. So I figured it would be a good time to focus on studies. And like you said, I went to Cégep in fine arts and then went to Concordia in design. And that's when I found CrossFit. So there's like a pretty big gap of time where I was not athletic and I was just a skinny hipster kind of person. Just kind of went through life like most teens. And then after
picturing that.
Yeah. Did the stuff,
Wow.
The teen stuff. But when I was in university, I was really focused on my studies. And then I went through like a pretty rough patches of breakups, and then found myself back in the gym as kind of like a way for me to take care of myself again. And then once I got into the gym doing regular gym stuff, I just kind of wanted to explore being a personal trainer. And my attempt at that was to apply to different gyms and get on the inside as a secretary or like a clerk, a part-time job and the gym that called me back was a CrossFit gym.
Oh, cool.
It was CrossFit Montreal. So I found CrossFit because they were looking for a secretary, and that's how I found it.
Awesome. That's a nice, I've been there once. It's a big, massive facility.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's
huge. It felt like I was walking into Good Life when I went in there, which is not the normal experience for anybody who's doing CrossFit.
I haven't been there in a long time, but I remember when I walked in, I don't know if your listeners have been doing CrossFit for very long, but I walked in there and the floors weren't fully covered in rubber. Like there was a clear defined workout space because the other spaces wasn't covered in rubber.
Just like concrete?
Yeah, it was just concrete. Wow. And the walls were gray, unpainted. The rig was like handmade in steel rods. This is before the whole rig. So I walked in there, I was like, what am I doing here? And then on top of that, the typical back then was like a hot topic. Now I know now, but back then it was a hot topic. But like the kipping pull-up was being performed when I walked in the gym, and I was like, what in the F is happening that? Right now? I had no idea. So I was just like kind of a mix of amazed, but really confused.
Yeah, I feel you.
And
makes you understand where the term box came from. Just like, I don't think there's a better term than that. It's definitely not a gym. I've been to a gym. This is not what a gym looks like.
And the gym I used to work out at Concordia was like this super clean, pristinely new gym.
Yeah.
Like
total
Oh my God,
polar opposite
machines are
experience.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No
Yeah,
machines. There's just people doing weird crap on the pull-up bars and on the
Like,
concrete, and they're just loving it. It's like cult-like. But it's so
it was
cool.
hilarious.
Yeah.
But I fell in love with it the second they told me that I had to do it because I had to know what I was selling.
Right.
I just really fell in love with the idea because it brought me back to water polo. It brought me back to training. Instead of just going to the gym, it became training again.
Right. Getting that competitive edge out.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So at some point along the line, you realized you could be pretty good at this, to say the least, and you started working with the chain. I remember watching you compete way back in the regional days against like you and Camille, and I don't think people realize how stacked that regional was, Canada East in the day, because it was just you and Camille every day, but you guys were like legends, and there was a lot of other good athletes that probably any other region they probably would have had a good shot, but it was just so competitive. So that was incredible, watching that kind of unfold. When you look at those days compared to today, what's the first thing that, like, do you think that I'm sure in some ways they've evolved in a better way? Like how do you see that compared to today's sort of format compared to how it was back then?
That's a really good question. And I think I've thought about that a lot because people often ask me like, if I would go back to compete today and how would I feel? And to me, it feels like the biggest change is the professionalism of it.
Right.
And because of that, the pressure. So when I started competing, I had a lot of pressure on myself because that's just how I am. But I didn't feel that kind of pressure coming from the girls that were there in, let's say, the middle of the pack to low pack. It felt like just a really fun, intense, but enjoyable competition. And it just feels like now when I go to the competition, it feels like the level of pressure that I see the bottom of the pack going through is probably the same, if not, it almost feels like it's more than what we were living in the top 10. But that's again, a question of perception. Like I may have not seen that when I was competing, and now I'm coaching and I can see everyone from a third person perspective, kind
just
of
looking
thing.
Through a different lens, a coaching lens.
But it definitely feels like there is more importance that is set on the events than there used to be.
Right.
But that said, like any athlete that doesn't compete anymore, I feel like I lived through the glory days where it was a nice mix of fun and pressure and reward and risk. You know, everything felt balanced.
Yeah. I just feel like it's almost more of a science now, and things are more dialed in. Like everybody's got a nutrition coach, and it's not just a couple hours a day. It's like you're spending 8 hours in the gym.
Yeah. And that's what we want. But what I'm seeing is that athlete that enjoyed the process of intense competition, serious competition, but didn't want the frou-frou and not the gimmicks, but the team behind being an athlete. Like I find that they're not getting the venue that they deserve, you know? Right.
Yeah. Fair enough. When you look back at the games, and this is probably a loaded question, but what is the first image when you think of competing as an athlete? Like, what are the highlights for you over those 6 years?
I guess there's no moment. And when I look back at my competitive career, I can honestly say that I am a better person today because of it. I've always felt like sport was like a magnifying glass on like philosophy. Like sport comes up with the best messages, the best ideas, and it's because everything is so intense and people need to kind of like rationalize what's happening to them. So to me, when I look back at my career, I just kind of pinpoint the moments that have made me who I am and that have allowed me to work today with more rigor and more discipline than possibly someone who hasn't been in the athlete perspective. I think of moments like training before the games back in 2012 when I was like, I'm the next best thing and this and that. And one of the events was published and I couldn't do it properly. In my opinion, I wasn't good enough. And I kicked the box and I broke my toe. Like that was a turning point for me because after that day, it was just like, I'm so angry. Like, why am I so angry? And then we start to ask ourselves a bunch of questions.
Right.
And then other moments, like not so good moments back in the 2015 games when we all went through Murph at like 2:00 in the afternoon, it was 50 degrees Celsius. You start to really sincerely question why you put yourself through the ringer all year round to only be beat by elements that are just totally beyond your control. I mean, there's so beyond our control in competition, but this is just setting us up for failure. So, and then another moment like that in 2016, you start to realize that, is this really it? You ask yourself questions because he put Murph again. And I'm like, I just trained a full year so that you can prove a point that you listen to the audience about how it, like, that's not what I trained for. So those are moments that kind of look back, that kind of put things in perspective inspiringly, but also put things into perspective in what are my Michele Letendre's values and goals with what I'm doing here.
Right.
And then there are highlights like in 2014, when I almost didn't make the games. And on the last event, I made it to a qualifying spot, because out in 2014, before the last event, I wasn't going to the games. And I had come, like, within the weekend, I kind of had come to terms with that I might not make it to the games, and then kind of squeezing in the last event. That was kind of a realization that, like, I was getting complacent.
You're talking about regionals? Was that when you and like Christine and Dolly were like going back?
Yes.
We were there for that. That was nuts.
Yeah. So nuts. Sorry, I should have put people into context, but at regionals, I wasn't I wasn't qualifying, but it put things into perspective. I was becoming complacent, even though I said, you never know. I kind of always knew that I could make it. And that really showed. And after that, I had the best year of my life, because it was just a true wake up call of, hey man, it's never, like, you never know. You really never know. So you better make sure that this is worth it,
Yeah, absolutely. That's like, I feel like sports just teaches us so many valuable life lessons like that. And I think it should be pretty mandatory. Maybe don't force your kids' hand in sports that they hate, but find something that they can apply themselves in, because it sticks with you. It's not just the fitness and movement. It's like the mental aspect and the camaraderie and all that stuff, and like facing failure and that kind of stuff. So that's cool. It's interesting that you bring up the stuff that's like not necessarily pleasant memories, but it's awesome that you turn that into this, you kind of reframed it into a positive.
Yeah. The most unpleasant memories are those the most profound. I mean, like, another example of that is in the games. And again, in 2012, I was facing deficit handstand push-ups, and I had to kip, and I never learned how to kip a handstand push-up.
Wow.
And so I walked into an event where I was like, I'm going to beat everybody because I'm so good at handstand push-ups. And I ended up coming close to last at something that I was very bad at. And now when I coach people, I tell them, never take for granted when a workout comes out, it's one of your strengths. Never take that for granted, because those tests are designed, excuse my language, to fuck you up. So
it's all good.
So that message, that event, I remember, because the wall was acrylic and I can see past the wall and people are staring at me, and I'm like, I'm a useless piece of, and you hit a low spot there that in normal life, no one would ever let themselves get there. But by the circumstances of the sport, I got there, and it was completely against I would never put myself there willingly. And that's the process that people forget about when they're not in sport, or when they're setting an objective. That moment, that bottom of the barrel moment, was a key component in my success in the following years. And you don't see that in the present, but you'll never be able to see that, because it's so you're so in your head. But the one thing that you can remind yourself constantly is that this will make me better.
Yeah.
Once you're over the emotional, because you have to live the emotion, you have to let that happen. It has to happen. But once you're over that. And the more you expose yourself to that, the more confident you are that you can get over it.
100%. Yeah. Failures are just life lessons. And I feel like the most, and it's kind of the cheesy thing, but the people that have failed most, I feel like, are the people that succeed the most. So that's amazing. So we kind of alluded to that shift into like coaching. And what are the key takeaways that you've taken from an athlete that you found have really given you advantage as a coach, and what's made you so successful with Deka? Everything from like beginners to athletes. Like what do you feel like they're golden nuggets that you picked up competing that you've been able to use as in your skill set?
Yeah. Well, and the skill sets are different based on who I'm coaching, right? Because like coaching a beginner, although I do believe that I'm a good coach, vocabulary wise, empathy wise, as a experienced athlete and talented athlete, there is a process that I might not have gone through that they have gone through.
Right.
We're talking beginners. So
you may never want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm mindful of that because as a female athlete, like certain movements didn't come natural to me, like handstand push-ups and muscle ups. So I had to go through process and progress for that. So in a sense, I know what a progression feels like. I just don't know what their progression feels like. But I was a beginner at CrossFit. So I like, and part of that is when I teach beginners is kind of oftentimes it'll be more mindset. So some beginners are really quick to want to get better. And so that's where experience as a games athlete can be, well, like you're looking at the result, but just remember that you have steps to get there. And because I've been through that and I know why they want to get to that point. And so I have to we have to mitigate that. But when I talk to my games athletes, like my higher level athletes, I've been through the only thing I haven't gone through as an athlete is a very grave injury. That's the only thing I haven't gone through. So I can see how frustrating it is, but I don't have that level of empathy. But I've been through the moments where all you want to do is quit. I've been through the moments where I was so hard on myself that today I look back and I regret. I've been through the moments where I was so frustrated with my limitations in certain skills. And I've been through the moments of really being able to shine in a workout in the best stage possible. Like I was lucky enough to win workouts at the games in the Home Depot Center on a Friday night. I've been through that kind of range of emotion.
Yeah.
So, and I know that when I lived through them, what I needed most was not solutions on the spot, it was just someone to hold and listen to me.
Right.
So I try not to make the mistake of trying to overthink something and just absorb their energy and just be there and let them take, like, get it all out and then re-grab their attention once that's done. I wish that I would have had that kind of kindness where I was able to live those negative emotions without feeling guilt.
Right.
And so that's where I think that sometimes I have an edge on that. And it's not everyone that works like that. I happen to work like that, where I need to live my emotions and express them in order to get over them.
Yeah.
And I know that others can't work like that. Like Pat's he's not someone that does that kind of stuff. So there's that level of empathy, but there's also the understanding of what fatigue does to you.
Yeah.
Like
physically and mentally.
Like when I hear athletes start to be negative, it's like they're fatigued.
Yeah.
Athletes are normally, in general, they're pretty confident people in their abilities. If not their physical abilities, their abilities to learn.
Right.
And so when they're starting to talk a different language of negativity, like that's fatigue.
Yeah.
So I can see that happening.
Yeah, for sure. I think and just from my own experience, and that's something probably that took me the longest to develop, is just learning to shut up and listen. Because because your mind's going, oh, I know this, I want to communicate this, but you kind of have to hear the whole story before you can really give them a full solution.
Yeah, you have to ask the right questions. Because a lot of athletes they will feel the emotions and they won't. And this is really this is a common thing. Like, this is a common thing in athletes. They'll feel the emotion and they don't know what it is, but they'll feel it. They don't know why it's happening. Like, the circumstances make it that the emotion appears, whether it's like failure or whether it's fatigue or whatever, but they might not understand what exactly it is they're feeling. Anger can be expressed because they're feeling sadness. Anger can be expressed because they're feeling incompetent. But we need to, as coaches, we need to figure out what it is that they're feeling and let them understand what it is so that they can come to terms with it and get through it.
Right.
But we have this natural tendency as people to kind of want to take away that pain and say, well, no, you're looking there. That's painful. Look over here. This is not painful.
Yeah.
And so hard. It's so hard. Like, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect all the time. I'm far from it, but even the emotions I feel when I hear negativity and sadness and pain and anger from the athletes, I have to kind of like interiorize it and say, okay, this is my interpretation of it. Now, like, set this aside and become objective and help them out. So it's hard. It's
tough to kind of toe the line, because like, you can't give them your solution to that problem. It has to be that solution that works for their specific issues. And I think like that's something you notice with like junior coaches is like, this worked for me. This is going to work for everybody. So it's tough. And I think you can only really get there for getting reps in. So let's talk about the process in starting with training like a high level athlete. Like, where does that conversation begin? Are you getting a lot of, like, do people reach out to you? Are you reaching out to them? And what do those first few conversations look like? Like, how do you decide whether it's a good fit?
I don't want to discourage people from reaching out, but when I do, so I mean, coaching my individual athletes is just one part of my job, but my first assessment is recognizing my limitations. And so I have a time limitation and I have a physical limitation. I don't have a gym anymore. Like, I don't have a space that I can accommodate athletes. And so these are my limitations. In reality, I would love to have my own gym and I would love to be able to coach as many people as I can, but Deka Comp's not there yet. Right. So my hands are still all on deck in there. So that's the first thing. If I have a conversation with someone and I feel like it will be too hands-on, then in respects, like, to respect their needs, I wouldn't take them on. It wouldn't be fair. And it's one of the first things I tell the athletes that are looking to work with me is like, you have to be independent enough to accept that I won't be talking to you every single day. Right. And I cannot watch everything that you do. Right. And that we'll have dedicated working times in either you coming with me or me going there, but they have to be scheduled. Yeah. And so setting expectations is super important to see who's understanding of that. Yeah. And I work best with independent athletes. Like, I was an independent athlete, and those are the athletes that I work best with. Yeah. And if I were to take on someone that I feel would need more time and more love and more hands-on, I wouldn't be at my best. I would feel a little bit flustered. That's number one. And then number two is, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but there's an attitude that I need to have. Yeah. And I've learned my lessons to kind of like see, I don't believe I'm at the point that I can confidently say that I can make any athlete successful. I'm not there yet as a coach. If there is an attitude issue, I do believe that I have limitations there. And I don't want to fight against someone's attitude. I don't have that kind of energy. And attitude doesn't mean that like everyone has to be positive all the time. That's not what I'm saying. Attitude means taking yourself account, like as an athlete, being accountable for how you're reacting and being smart enough to understand what's going on. And on occasion, I'll help with context and I'll be there to kind of support. But if you don't have the maturity and the attitude of professionalism, that means that you're going to be responsible for your process and I'm there to guide you, then maybe it's not the right fit.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like seeing a doctor and be like, here, fix every problem that I have and, and turn me into this. They have to want it themselves and have that little bit of resourcefulness themselves to kind of work their way through it.
Definitely. I can't and I think in any coach that is looking to be a high level athlete coach that wants to progress to that level, what I find is important is understanding yourself, being self-aware, knowing your limitations and knowing where you're the best. And then working on the weaknesses at a rate that is achievable and feasible for you.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah, that's, I think, like on a scale, I think everyone's got some version of that as a coach. You have your certain niche that you work with, and it has to be the right fit both ways. Otherwise, it's not. Yeah. You're just kind of setting up for failure. Let's talk about a little bit of the X's and O's, what a snapshot of training looks like. Obviously, it's going to be different for athletes. How much do you cater to weaknesses? Do you have like a general, like we need to do this many of this movement per week? Or when you start programming for an athlete, where does your mindset start with when you start to look at that stuff?
That's a great question. I change a lot. So I'm not traditionally trained. So I like to try things. And like it's part of what I've done. Pat is like my guinea pig.
Not a bad guy to have as guinea pig.
No, he's done all kinds of different things that I've decided to try. And after 5 or 6 years of doing this, I've kind of come to a conclusion that what I'm doing now is actually quite effective. And so I think that I've found my recipe, but weaknesses I try to attack on low intensity days. So structurally, the way I like to do things is I'll have high intensity days, low volume, low intensity days, high volume. And I've taken that because I started myself doing endurance sports and I started to educate myself on endurance training. And I was very intrigued by this 80-20 system. So a lot of the thing about being an athlete in CrossFit is that a lot of our work is done at high intensity. And what high intensity does a lot is trigger emotional responses because it's your heart rate goes up and then all of a sudden you can get into this spiral. Exactly. So when I was working on my weakness, which when I was an athlete was wall balls, running was a huge one, deadlifting, things like that. I often found myself in a negative emotional spiral. Right. And today I can see that as
through the roof.
Yeah. Like I see that today as I was trying to be really good, really fast at the same time. And the emotional response I was feeling was really an intensity triggered emotionally response. So what I'm doing now is I like to work on weaknesses on low intensity days, high volume. So they get tons of rep, but the guides that I give my athletes is you're supposed to do this and feel like you can still talk. And what that means is like, I want you to do 100 pistols and you just kind of go through them really smoothly and really slowly to kind of get comfortable with the pattern and take away any form of pressure.
Right. So you're staying in that aerobic stimulus the whole time. And
totally. Yeah. And so if you're not in that conversational pace and you're not in that complete control pace, then it's not the low intensity that I'm looking for when it comes to weakness. Right. And then in other days, the higher intensity days is where I really just kind of train the athletes to do their CrossFit thing. So the focus is really on heart rate. The focus is on tough combinations that are consistent throughout our sport. We do more couplets in this format. We do more intervals on these days, and we lift heavier loads on these days. And then based on where they are in the year, it'll be 80-20, 50-50. It depends.
Right. So you sort of periodize things throughout the year. And
yeah. And since I've been doing this, the beauty of this is that there's less focus on, it's less a focus on making sure the timing of percentages is right. And it's a little bit more conjugate style where it's like kind of consistent throughout the year. And what's periodized is the volume.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough.
And this works really well for advanced athletes. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for lower, like more intermediate competitive athletes, because the advanced athletes have developed their patterns and have a more good understanding of their techniques and stuff like that.
Right. For sure. Let's talk about injury prevention. This is kind of like we could go a lot of different directions with this. Obviously, we need mobility. Are you programming mobility for them? Are you just encouraging them to kind of like listen to their body, or do you have a mobility system that you guys use, or how does that work?
So the general population, well, not the general the Deka Comp like population, on our blog, I call it a blog, but it's on our site. They do mobility in their warm-ups every day. And Kevin Bowles is the one who programs for these guys. Cool. And Kevin does an amazing job of providing a very thoughtful and specific warm-up that includes mobility, not stretching, mobility before the workout. Mm-hmm. And that's ingrained in the Deka Comp culture. Mm-hmm. Personally, with my athletes, I like to give the athletes the freedom. And this is where the maturity comes in.
Right.
Because I'm not there with them. I always tell them, I expect you to prepare properly for this. And the athletes that I do have on board do it really well.
Yeah.
On occasion when we're creeping up close to a competition, I'll put it in their calendar, but it will be open enough that they choose what they need to do. Cause I don't want to make them stretch their adductors if their quads are an issue.
Right. Yeah. That's totally fair.
And I always tell people, like, when I was competing, I had a physiotherapist, a massage therapist, an osteopath, and I had another physiotherapist that had other specialties. Yeah. And if you're not willing to do that at the level of athlete that you're at, then I'm not going to start programming it for you. Like, you have to take care of that. That's yours. That belongs to you.
Yeah. And that's how you got through 6 years without getting injured. I mean, a bit of luck,
well,
maybe.
I had no significant injuries, but I did have injuries.
We all got bumps and bruises. I feel like everybody's dealing with something at the games, right? Like, it's just, they'll just casually say, oh yeah, he's dealing with a fracture, stress fracture in his foot or whatever. Like,
whatever.
You know?
Yeah. Those are injuries that are I don't think any level of mobility, stretching, taking care of your body can actually remove the amount of strain that you are putting yourself through as a competitive games professional level athlete.
Right. Let's talk about the mental piece. So this is something that I think you kind of have your criteria when you have those first conversations. Do you teach like mental drills, or do you just kind of encourage that, or do you, that's kind of like left up to them? How does that work?
I don't give them mental drills because I don't think everybody accepts it the same way.
Right.
And like, I've gone through different coaching styles, and I know that the first coaching style that I've gone through was very hands-off, and clearly it wasn't meant for me in the sense that I didn't feel like I was connecting and being heard, because all of a sudden any kind of negative feedback towards the training was like, just do the training. And it was like, shut up and do the work.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, I went to see another coach that was really strong on mindset talk. And it just went like this to me, because it gave me so much pressure to act a certain way. And I know this today, I didn't know this back then, that I would just kind of take it and make fun of it, because it was just, it just felt completely abstract to me.
Right.
And it felt like I had to be a certain way. And if I wasn't that certain way, then I would never win. That's how I felt. I didn't know it, but now I can confidently say that back then, the champions need to act a certain way was basically, Michele, you're not a champion because that's not how you are. And the reality is that I'm an expressive person. I'm opinionated. I don't keep my opinions to myself. When I struggle with a concept, I ask questions. Right. I create resistance. And part of that is on me. I should have been more open-minded, but naturally I will kind of be like, well, why? Why do I do this? And then some people see that as resistance. Where I've always felt most powerful as an athlete when I can work on technique and have real concrete things to actually develop. And the more concrete things that I could develop, the more control I felt like I had. Right. And so the whole spiel of control what you can control to me didn't feel good, because it's like, well, I'm told that I can't control anything. Like, I'm told that well, really the only thing you can control is your performance and how you react to whatever.
Right.
But in reality, I'm a practical person. So to me, control means, well, I can control my technique. I can control my breathing. I can control where I put my hands. I can control where I put the chalk. I can control where I put my effort. I can control my pacing. I can control my rep schemes. There's so much I can control. And I'm a control freak. So if I were being coached today, rather than telling me there's not much you can control, Michele, you should tell me, look at how much you can control. Mm-hmm. And so that gives me power. And so this is where not all minds think alike. And if you take away the control that I desperately need to feel competent, I will feel like I am incompetent and unable to achieve my goals.
Right. That's
so there's a flip side to that whole thing.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said about like kind of letting go of the control, but being mindful of the people's needs is more important than the idea that you have, because a good coach will understand the concept of not being in control of the outcome. But an excellent coach will say, well, my athlete is a control freak, so we need to list out everything they actually can control and the little things that they can't. Right. So it's just a question of perspective. So I don't like to feed mental things. I think a lot of that has to do with the person's maturity to kind of develop them and ask themselves the right questions to see who they are and how they're motivated. Yeah, fair enough. I feel like it's working, right? Your athletes are kicking butt at the games, and I feel like whatever you're doing it's got a winning formula to it. And on that note, do you have like predictions for the season? Are there new athletes you kind of got your eyes on? Like, what are you expecting out of this year? I can only talk to the athletes that I'm coaching. Sure. Ellie, like I can predict, like many people, that the fight will be against Justin and Pat. I think on the inside between Pat and I, there's a lot of things that we're doing this year that can give him a real good shot of winning the games. And I'm confidently, every year, every single year that I've coached Pat, I know that he can win the games. And it's just a matter of finding the right pieces of the puzzle. Right.
It just feels like every year there's just one little annoying thing that happens. We just watched the new documentary in 2018 where he fell off the ropes. I'm like, man, the hardest moment I've ever had. Spitting up blood, man, poor guy. And and he still finished second. So all he needs is a year where none of those little annoying things happen. I feel like he's going to take it.
Funny thing about that year is that when I was in the bleachers watching that event, the screen went. The screen stopped working right when he fell.
Oh my God.
And there was a technical glitch, honestly. And so I had no idea he fell.
Oh,
I had no idea. And then I went in the back to kind of to get Pat, because they walk into the athlete warm-up area and he wasn't coming. And I was like, what is going on? Where is he? And then Matt Fraser came up to me and he said, Michele, Pat's spitting up blood, so he's still over there with doctors. And I was like, oh my God, my heart dropped. But
oh my God.
Going back to your initial question of prediction, I could say confidently that the two female athletes that I'm currently coaching that are games level athletes, one of them is unknown because she's never made it to the games, but I strongly feel that she is the next Canadian female athlete to look out for.
Cool.
And then Ellie, I think she has nowhere to go but up. There's a lot of work to do with Ellie, but I love that. She's like a rough diamond. Like, we need to clean her up and polish her off, and she has got a lot of potential. So this year, on the women's side, which is rare because oftentimes, like Deka Comp, we're known for, we have a lot of male athletes that have done really well. But on the women's side, we have two really good contenders for a solid performance this year. And I really think that my female Canadian athlete, I don't want to put her on the spot, but I think that she's got a ton of potential, and she's got such a great attitude.
It's amazing.
And she's got such a good surrounding where she is. She's well surrounded. So I have a lot of confidence that she can really, in French, the word is pierce, that she can really pierce through.
Cool.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well, we'll look out for
I'm
those
excited.
athletes this year. Let's
Yeah.
talk about, before we wrap things up, just talk about your own habits these days. So competing days,
Yeah.
we're maybe keeping the door open, maybe we'll compete again, but what does that look like right now? Your own kind of training schedule. What is your priority around your own health and fitness? Is it like mobility? Is it just kind of like maintenance right now? What are you kind of zeroed in on?
So I've fallen into the endurance sports, and
Oh, cool.
I'm really enjoying it because taking it seriously can be like of various degrees, because it's a very popular, it's a very populated sports.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I found my niche where I can appease my competitive nature, which is really intrinsic. Like I'm intrinsically competitive. Like when I do a workout, I get into this flow and I just push to a level of satisfaction where all of a sudden I stop thinking and I'm just performing.
Right.
And that to me is different than competitive. So I've really gotten into running and I've really gotten into triathlon. So right now I train like anywhere between 4 and 6 times a week, depending on work. And it's really about running, cycling, swimming. I don't do very much because I'm lucky enough that I have a background in swimming and I don't like doing it. So I kind of like push that to the side. And then on occasion, I'll hop into the gym and do some CrossFit here and there for fun and to get some eyes on me and to just to keep in touch with CrossFit. And I don't think that's going to stay like that. Like it's going to change the same way I used to do CrossFit every day. Like it's changed today. And I have no doubt that I'll go back to the gym and do more CrossFit stuff. But for now, it's really about endurance and enjoying being outside.
That's worth its weight in gold. I love that.
Yeah. So running and cycling is amazing. And in the winter, I cross country ski. I also run outside. So being outside is really something that I wish I could have done more of when I was in the best shape of my life.
Yeah, fair enough. Awesome. Well, Michele, this has been an awesome chat. I really appreciate you sitting in. This is fantastic. What's the best way for people to get in touch or get connected with Deka Comp or learn more?
Well, Deka Comp on Instagram, we're really present and we answer our messages. So it's at Deka Comp in one word, no caps.
Cool.
Personally, Instagram is probably the best way because emails kind of get piled up. So Instagram at MICH_Letendre, my last name, LETENDRE. And I check my messages on a regular basis and pretty approachable. And I love to coach and love to connect with people. So that's how people can be reached. Deka Comp. We also have our website, also obviously. So
Deka Comp. Yeah, we'll link to all your goodies in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Craig, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure's mine. Well, thanks for tuning in for Healthspan Academy today, guys. We'll see you next time.